Okay, not quite. All right, hi everybody. All right, thanks for that. Thanks for that intro. As it was kind of said, I am a researcher and a lecturer at Stanford University. I also lead the decentralized systems work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Digital Currency Initiative. Oh, okay. So, my research mostly focuses around privacy, specifically in the legal context at Stanford. So I care about things like what happened with Tornado Cash and how we can maybe prevent that from happening again. At MIT, I do a little bit more technical research, so if you are interested at all in Bitcoin development or in the environmental impacts of cryptocurrency or MEV, please come talk to me. We're always looking for collaborators. So today, I am here to talk about blockchain ethics and how we can actually bring ethics, more classical philosophical ethics, into a decentralized world in which those paradigms don't necessarily fit cleanly. So I don't have a timer here. Is that a problem? I can keep time by myself if I have to. No timer, but I'll just kind of plow ahead. Okay, so my goals here are, one, to motivate blockchain ethics. This is a pretty nascent field. It still has a lot of thinking that needs to be done. I would like to poke a little bit in terms of actually developing it and making it useful for this space, and eventually clear a path forward so that other people can pick up the mantle here and kind of run with it and do their own developments on what an ethical framework could look like in a Web3 world. All right, so my introduction to blockchain ethics was a couple years ago from a colleague of mine, Reese Lindmark, and he deserves all the credit for most of the thought that is happening right now in blockchain ethics. One thing that he said that I found particularly impactful was he said, kind of offhandedly, if blockchain will be even 10% as impactful as the internet, now is the time, and this was in 2018, 2019, now is the time to start making sure that we are developing it responsibly. By the time it actually hits this 10% threshold, or potentially even higher, it's probably too late. And one of my big worries is that I think we've actually hit that threshold maybe a long time ago. So the time to start thinking about responsible innovation and ethics in this world was probably a couple years ago. So I am taking kind of a better late than never approach here. All right, so the motivations here are to ensure responsible development of the blockchain space. And you might be asking, what does that look like? Well, one thing that we want to do is allow blockchain to thrive. I think everybody here is kind of in agreement with that. We want to, as much as possible, reduce negative externalities. As we'll see in the next couple of slides, I don't think it's possible to actually eliminate them. And there's something to be said about accepting some negative externalities if we can get some benefit from there. And the last thing that I hope we do is we allow blockchain to fail when necessary. Blockchain is a really cool tool, but we don't necessarily do a good job sometimes of differentiating when it's useful and when it's causing more harm. Okay, so those are kind of the goals of this talk in the future. Another motivation here is that this is an empty space right now. We have bioethics, we have AI ethics, we have legal ethics. There are a lot of subfields of ethics because overarching ethical principles don't always map cleanly onto a space like this. So we probably need blockchain ethics. This is something we need to start thinking about, and we need to develop it in a way that actually works for this community. Okay? And a lot of this all falls out of the idea that blockchains, cryptocurrencies, these all raise novel ethical issues that we just don't find historically. And so in the same way that the law is really struggling to catch up, right? We have securities laws that were written in the 30s, and now we're trying to just kind of grossly push them onto ICOs and things like that. It doesn't work well. Same thing happens with ethics. We're trying to take ethics that have been around for 4,000 years and put them on top of a new kind of decentralized world, and it's falling short. Okay? So, blockchain ethics is actually, I think, of critical importance, but it might be worth asking, why do ethics matter at all? Why should anybody care about ethics in this world? The easy answer is that it makes us better people. It changes the world and it changes how we interact with it. But if you need something more concrete, I actually find ethics really interesting because they provide an intuitive foundation for this idea that some differences are just unresolvable and that that's completely valid. Okay, so there's a very classic problem in ethics called the trolley problem. Maybe people have heard of it. A very naive version says you're standing next to some train tracks, and there's a train, barreling down the tracks that you're near, and there's a group of 5 people standing down the tracks. Maybe they're not paying attention, and if you do nothing, this train will hit these people, and they will all die. And that is obviously a very bad thing. If anybody thinks that's a good thing, I would love to come talk to you. We can fight about this maybe a little bit. But in this scenario, you're also standing next to a switch. And you can take this affirmative action and you can flip the switch and you can shunt the train off onto another track where there's only one person. So there are really two schools of thought here. Different people approach this problem in different ways. Some people say, of course you flip the switch, right? You are saving 5 lives. The cost of that is 1 life. Simple math would tell you that this is actually a really, really good thing, and there's no question that this switch needs to be flipped. There's another school of thought that says, by actually performing that action, you're involving yourself in this decision, and you're doing a bad thing. I understand that you're saving 5 people, but you're performing an affirmative action that kills somebody, and maybe that in and of itself is enough to say that's the wrong action. And we haven't figured out, in the field of philosophy, how to get down past those two. Those are very foundational, and it's not often in the world where such foundational considerations arrive at different outcomes. And so just kind of realizing that and injecting that line of thinking into your everyday life, I think does a lot to bring more compassion when people don't agree with you. A lot of times it just comes back to these first principles, and there's no right answer. That's just, that's something that I think computer scientists, blockchain people, especially lawyers, we're not very comfortable with, but maybe we should be. All right, so the inspiration for blockchain ethics is what has kind of been happening in bioethics. Bioethics has developed this framework of 4 ethical principles, and they've sort of said, well, almost every bioethical dilemma can be resolved by looking at these principles, and it should be guiding principles for how we operate as a field. All right, so these are respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Don't have to go into those, but what I'm going to try to do today is look at what ethical principles actually underpin blockchain, because blockchain is very different. All right, some of the differences are it's always been very top-down historically. Ethics have come from places like religion, they've come from philosophy, they've come from institutions that have power. But decentralized principles, especially a community like the Ethereum community, and especially things like Web3, can change how ethics are actually developed. We can actually go back and say, let's develop a new substrate for ethics, and the question here is, what will that look like? So to some extent, this is kind of an open call to the Ethereum community to take this opportunity to converge on new ethical principles and maybe change the way we think about ethics and certainly change the way that we think about blockchain. All right? So the sparse history of blockchain ethics, the DCI had a blockchain ethics course that is freely available online. I would encourage people to kind of look through that. There's been some current thinking on how to approach blockchain ethics. It tends to fall into 2 camps. Some people say, well, it's a combination of tech and financial ethics and institutional ethics. And that's really valid. That's a really fun way to look at it. You can also look at the micro, meso, and macro layers of it by examining the tech stack, the application layer, and then the institutional and societal layer. There's a lot of other thought that has kind of gone into it. Some of it is good, some of it is bad, but by and large, this is a pretty sparse space. So for people who are interested in getting in sort of early in the thought process and helping shape some of these fields, this field is right for people that could actually come in and contribute and have a pretty sizable impact. Okay, so at this point, as a community, I think we have a skeleton of why blockchain ethics matters, but we really need to begin to develop workable ethical principles. Okay, so that's what I hope to kind of start to do here. So before we get into the principles, I want to talk about my own ethical approach here. It's kind of a bias check. It makes sure that when people hear the things that I say, they can factor my biases in and take it with a grain of salt. So there are a lot of different ways to approach ethics, and there are a lot of different ways to approach blockchain ethics. One of the big questions is, what is it that we're optimizing for? We can optimize for the individual if we want. We can say, how do we build this that most empowers the individual? We can optimize for a society. What are we doing that sort of most boosts society? That can be the Ethereum community. It can be just society at large. It can be at the country level, at the worldwide level. We can also look at how we optimize the technology. Or, in a very kind of meta sense, we can look at how we optimize for favorable outcomes. I'm going to skip that one for now. It raises all kinds of meta-ethical questions. It's not clear what a favorable outcome is or whose perspective we should be looking at, but that is a valid way to approach it. So my thesis here is that we can't actually know, even if it's our eventual goal, how to optimize for the individual or how to optimize for society until we understand what it actually looks like to optimize for the most neutral substrate that we have, which is the technology. So I'm starting from a point of what ethics should be put on top of the technology so that we can eventually get to optimizing for the individual and society. Okay? And just as a last note, this will not reflect how an economic system will actually work in the real world. I think that's a problem with ethics in general, but I think that's just what we have to work with here. Okay? So the principles that I've set out here, it kind of follows the bioethical principles to some extent, but it's trustlessness, objectivity, respect for autonomy, and permissionlessness. A lot of these come from kind of the Bitcoin tradition. The one that I'm the most interested in a Ethereum Web3 context is objectivity. I'm going to go through these in a little more detail now. So trustlessness says, no third-party trust should be required to perform an operation. So that can be something like viewing information. It can be just in general faithfully engaging with the system. This is a look at how the individual engages with the world. Okay, so this is useful for people like developers. It's useful for people that want to go out and evangelize the blockchain space, people that consider themselves or are maybe don't consider themselves, but the law considers them fiduciaries. And the requirement here is that trustlessness doesn't require independent verification. That would be kind of a high bar, but it requires the ability to independently verify. So without that, there's something very, very important missing from what I think of as the blockchain world. You need individuals to have the ability to leverage this trustlessness so that they can, if they want to, trust but verify, but they don't have to. Right? Trying to kind of keep the bar pretty reasonable. The important one here is objectivity, and that's really important for in an Ethereum context. So, generally speaking, there are often objective answers to things, not always. But when there are objective answers, we should seek them out. So this is a look at how the individual engages with the truth. One of my big fears about the world, and specifically about the blockchain community, is that sometimes we forget to really engage with this idea of objectivity. We have our own biases. We have our own incentives. It's really easy to do something like convince yourself that the hot ICO that you've invested in, I'm kind of picking that because I think we're out of the woods with that chapter for the most part. But it's really easy to convince yourself that this new coin that you've invested in is the best thing in the world. And an objective analysis might say, actually, maybe we don't need a coin that helps you just pay your dentist, and that's kind of all it does. And maybe if the price goes up, we're doing something wrong. So we need to get a lot better about being objective about the information that we believe and the information that we share. So the requirements here are adversarial thinking. That's something that a lot of people dislike. There's a lot of defensiveness just in the world. It's a very human trait. Maybe I'm projecting. I definitely skew a little bit defensive when people challenge me, but without adversarial thinking, the entire ecosystem is weaker. Adversarial thinking is a very powerful way to protect against attacks, and the reason for that is that an adversarial attack on your ideas, on your protocol, on whatever it is, it really only has two outcomes. Either you successfully defend against the adversarial attack, and then you have proven to yourself that you are hard enough to have that not be a worry. You've proven that proven is a strong word, but you at least have a lot of evidence that your ideas are sound, at least against that particular attack. Or, if the adversarial attack succeeds, you have learned something really, really, really important. Everybody should always be wanting adversarial attacks on their system, on their protocol, on their ideas, and that is something that we as a community need to get a lot better about. Okay? The second requirement is a reduction of individual desires and motivations. If we want to see this technology succeed, it's not always the best thing to do to optimize for the individual right away. Okay? So everything has negative externalities if used improperly. That goes for blockchain, that goes for new coins that people want to mint. We need to be thinking very objectively about whether these things are good for the world and are the right things that we should be promoting. All right, respect for autonomy is maybe less exciting, but it's one that is maybe the closest to my heart. Respect for autonomy says that all participants, including civil participants, shouldn't matter, have equal autonomy. So another issue that I have seen in, I guess in the world, but also just in the blockchain space, is this idea of autonomy for me, but not for thee. And I kind of ripped that from sort of the free speech cry, but it's a problem when people believe very strongly, at least ostensibly, in autonomy, and are willing to give themselves autonomy, but not grant that to other people. So I think one of the things that we need to work on is accepting behavior that we think is wrong. It's very easy to think that we're right about something. It's very easy to say, I believe that this is either the right thing or the wrong thing, and when people don't do what we expect them to do, it's very upsetting. But the principle of autonomy would say, in so much as I have autonomy to do what it is that I find important, to vote the way I want to vote, to push the protocols that I want to push, everybody else also has that same right. Okay, so what I would push for here is community over tribalism. Tribalism is something that has a pretty real chance at tearing the blockchain community apart. It's gotten, I've been part of the blockchain world for like 7 or 8 years, and that the tribalism meter is just, it's steadily growing, and it's really kind of viscerally upsetting to see. Okay, so the last one here is permissionlessness. I think we all kind of have a pretty intuitive idea what this is, but it says that actions undertaken by the system should not be subject to individual whims or incentives. Okay, so open systems in general really must be free systems, otherwise it's not clear what we're doing here. The requirements for permissionlessness, I would say, are decentralization. We need to get a little bit better about carefully architecting permissionless systems. We've kind of gotten into a space now where we've blended the line between permissionless blockchains and permissioned blockchains, and I think both have their place, but they maybe are not equivalent in the way that we're starting to move towards seeing them as. And also permissionlessness requires accepting negative externalities, which again is not something that we as a community are very good at. But permissionlessness says, if somebody wants to put something really, really awful on the blockchain, exercise their autonomy and do that, maybe that's a negative externality that we should consider accepting, because the benefits that we get are so much greater. All right, 1 minute? All right. So I just want to touch on what was actually left out here. These are things that I considered putting in as ethical principles, and they didn't quite make the cut, or they got subsumed under something else. We have immutability, the idea of code is law, optimizing for favorable outcomes, and the general idea of decentralization. I put that as kind of a subcategory, but maybe that's enough of an important concept that it should be near the top, and it should be its own kind of top-level consideration. So for people who are interested in this, I'm looking to get some people to help put together this community-driven set of ethical principles. So I have a GitHub here that it kind of pushes to a website, but I'm hoping that we can get people to help develop that. Or you can talk to me about engaging with the DCI. We're always looking for collaborators, and this is something that I am personally very passionate about. All right, so you can email me here. I feel like people tend to put their Twitter. I don't actually have a Twitter that I use very often, but I do have a list of people that are worth following who agree with me. And then I also have a list of people who very strongly disagree with me and are maybe more anti-blockchain. And these people are also really, really worth following because it'll expose you to a new way of thinking, and you'll start to you'll just get exposed to things that maybe are uncomfortable, but are ultimately a lot of fun. So if you're going to follow somebody, I would mostly focus on that side. Maybe we all kind of, maybe we follow all these people already, but yeah, give them a look. So thank you, everybody.